Actor Heath Ledger is best known for his role as the Joker in the movie The Dark Knight, and his investment in that character is truly impressive. Before the film, he locked himself in a hotel room for 6 weeks to basically channel the character of the Joker and to become that character so that he could embrace his qualities. So he used a journal to kind of think through the Joker's thoughts and ways of thinking and ways of viewing the world. And he experimented with the Joker's mannerisms and voice and all sorts of intricacies and really tried to become the Joker and embody his traits. And he reports really having a positive experience doing the film, but he also expresses that playing this psychopathic, schizophrenic clown who's just spreading mass hysteria was mentally draining and exhausting for him. And he also says that it was really difficult for him after the film to separate himself from the character, and he found himself feeling isolated and having a hard time sleeping. So he had spent so much time in the mind of a psychopath, and he was having a hard time getting himself out of that character and that mindset. And while Heath Ledger's experience with this is pretty extreme and came through some impressive dedication and talent in acting, we actually all experience this to a degree very often in our lives. Each and every one of us has had experiences in which we get lost in a role. So, for example, employees play roles in which they are an employee who is pretty good but can't be excellent. And they just tell themselves that that's who they are. And they tell themselves that that's who they are going to be. And so they start acting in accordance with that role. And because they're acting in accordance with that role, the results of acting in accordance with that reinforce that role to them. So then they believe that role even more, that that's who they are. And so it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle of being stuck in this role that's limiting their true capabilities. Or athletes, for example, play the role sometimes of a pretty good athlete, but maybe one who's just good at defense and doesn't really score. And those athletes start going out and doing their sport, playing their sport with that role. They've put that costume on. The role that I'm playing is I'm an athlete who's great at defense, but I don't really contribute much on offense. And because they're playing that role, they act in accordance with it, and it reinforces itself, and it becomes something that they get stuck in. They see that as who they are. This happens all the time. Leaders, for example, maybe leaders sometimes get stuck seeing themselves as somebody who the people that they lead don't really respect or love. They see themselves as someone who's not really respectable or not one who people want to follow. And they start playing that role. And people actually don't respect them very much because they're playing that role. So it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. So we have to learn to break free from roles that we are playing that are limiting our true potential. Because the truth is that we have so much potential within us, but when we play limiting roles, we keep ourselves from accessing the fullness of that potential. So, how do we go about doing this? How do we break free from limiting roles? Well, step number one is to simply become aware of the roles that we're playing. Specifically, become aware of any limiting roles that we're playing that are keeping us from being our best. So, for example, I remember for me, back in high school when I was playing water polo, I realized at one point that I was playing the role of an athlete who was pretty good but didn't have the ability to really thrive in the sport. I saw myself as being someone who could only ever get to pretty good and not really higher than that. And when I realized that that was the role that I was playing, I became open to so many more possibilities. So, first of all, just become aware of the role that you're playing. Are you playing the role of an employee who doesn't have what it takes to get the promotion? Or somebody who doesn't have what it takes to become a leader? Or a leader who doesn't have what it takes to truly inspire those around them and really help people to become their very best? Are you playing the role of an athlete who's limited in various ways? Just become aware of the roles that you are playing. Self-awareness is critically important for bringing about any change. And then step number 2 is to break free from that role by taking on a role that will enable you and empower you to become something more than you currently are. So take on a role that's empowering for you. So, for example, as an athlete, what I did in water polo was I decided, okay, I'm going to put myself in the mindset of a water polo player who everybody on the team and the coaches and in the stands, who everybody sees as an incredible water polo player. So that's the role I'm going to take on. I'm playing the role of a water polo player who everybody sees as incredible. And I tried to play my game in that role. And that role didn't just magically change the way people thought about me. I'm sure there were some people who thought I was good and some people who thought I wasn't that great and everything in between. But it changed the way that I approached my game. When I started playing like a water polo player who people admired and respected, more of my capabilities that had been trapped inside of me and hadn't been coming out, those capabilities began to come out. And I realized that I was more capable than I had been allowing myself to be, because I was playing a limited role and now I was playing an empowering role. Timothy Gallwey is an impressive tennis coach who's helped many tennis players at all levels bring their game up to higher and higher and higher levels. And he has some fascinating books on what he calls the inner game, or the mental side of high performance. And in his book called The Inner Game of Tennis, he talks about a drill that he uses with lots of his tennis players, in which he invites them to consider that they are playing a role in a movie. So they've been hired as actors in a movie, and the movie is about high-level, top-tier tennis players. And he invites them to not really worry about exactly where the ball goes and exactly how the results turn out, but just focus on embodying the attributes of a high-level, top-tier tennis player, and make sure that you are showing the personality traits and the actions of that type of player. And it's very fascinating. He and his players have found over and over and over again that when they take on that mindset, when they take on that role, that I am playing the role of a top-tier tennis player, and I'm taking action in accordance with that role, they 100% of the time play better than they normally do. They realize that they're more capable than they normally believe that they are and realize that they are. They have capabilities within themselves that were just waiting to come out, and they didn't come out until they started putting themselves in this role. And one thing that Timothy Gallwey notes that's critically important is that in role playing, it's important to recognize that we are role playing. So we're not trying to lie to ourselves and convince ourselves that our capabilities are more than they actually are. But we're just trying to put ourselves in the mindset of a high performing person or some sort of empowering role, we're trying to put ourselves in that mindset and simply see what capabilities come out when we are in that mindset. So, with that in mind, one of the key concerns that people bring up to me about this concept is they say, well, what if I'm playing this empowering role and then I make a mistake? Won't that ruin everything? Because then all the magic will be lost and I'll recognize that I'm not as awesome as this role and I'll start getting down on myself and having a bunch of self-doubt. And I totally see that. That's definitely a concern. But it's also missing the point a little bit because we're not trying to trick ourselves into thinking that we are something that we're not. We're simply playing a temporary role and seeing what happens while we play that role. So if you are a great varsity athlete, but you're not yet at the point where you're at Olympic level or professional level, if you're not at that level yet, we don't want to lie to ourselves and try to convince ourselves that we actually are at that level. We want to be open to our strengths and to our weaknesses. But the problem is that very often we're blinded to many of our strengths. And simply putting ourselves in a role helps us to notice and implement those strengths that often lie dormant. It's the same in leadership. It's the same in parenting. It's the same at work. In anything that we do, we can play a role to become more than we are. And when we fall short, so when we're in that empowering role and we do something that's not consistent with that role, it's okay. All we have to do is reset and start again and say, okay, from this point moving forward, I'm playing the role again. And we can do that by asking ourselves, what would this person, this high-performing person, this high-performing leader, this high-performing athlete, this high-performing employee, this employee who knows that he or she is going to get the promotion, what actions would this person take right now? What would their actions look like? What would their attitude look like? And just put yourself back into that role and take action on it the best that you can. Another thing that this is really helpful for is simply experimenting with various ways to approach something. So even if you're not necessarily struggling in what you do, but you want to maybe expand your abilities, you want to expand your approaches and experiment with different approaches to your leadership or your sport or your work, whatever it is. Role-playing can be very helpful for that. For example, if you tend to lead in one specific type of way and you want to kind of experiment with new approaches, you could ask yourself, what would a leader with a different core approach do in this situation? And if you'd like, you can put yourself in that role. Say, just for this meeting, I'm going to put myself in the role, in the mindset of a leader who typically takes a different approach than me. And I'm just going to see what happens. And this can help you to break free from the limitations of your habits that may be good, but maybe are limiting in the sense that you always go to them and never use other approaches that may also be very effective and can add to your tool belt if you start to take them on. So role-playing can limit us in huge ways when we don't realize that we're playing a role that is limiting us, a role that's keeping us from unleashing our highest possibilities and the highest skills within us. But role-playing can also help to unleash the greatness within us by helping us to see more than we currently see in ourselves, to just experiment with, what's here, what is within me, and let's see what will come out when I put myself in this empowered mindset, this empowered role. As you do that, you'll be incredibly surprised and even baffled by what can come out, by the incredible things that you can accomplish. I look forward to hearing about what you accomplish as you apply this. Thank you all so much for listening today. I truly appreciate it. Please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and share this podcast on social media. It will help others to benefit from it too. Thank you so much. Let's go be high performing today.